Buenas noches a todos. Welcome to Tom Plays EUIV Universalis 4 for absolute beginners. We are going to play Castile. It's the second of the suggested nations. So we get a bit of information on them. The basic info here is that Castile is actually made up of a number of different countries, so it's relatively new as a whole area, so we can expect quite a lot of issues with nobles, with rebellions and things like that. And also that our first objective is to finish the Reconquista, which was basically an attempt to retake the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslim sultanates from North Africa, which has mostly been done. There's just one remaining sultanate left, called Granada, in the extreme south. We're Roman Catholics, we like to remain so we're going to have a few things dealing with the papacy, and I'm probably going to play the ruler as a firm Catholic, because it just fits in well with the country. With the history, monarchies, that's fairly standard, although there is one interesting additional feature for the Christian nations, which is basically the concept of the personal union, where it's possible to effectively get your dynasty on another nation's throne, and if you're very lucky or very aggressive, you can actually take that nation over. And as a mention of the Holy Roman Empire, which is probably not going to affect us much, except that we might have allies. So this is a screen we start with. You can look around just by moving to the edge of the screen. I usually use the mouse wheel to scroll in and out to get different details. So our land is all the areas in yellow. We actually also have Gran Canaria down here, which will come in useful later, because our main ability is as a colonial nation, even though in many ways we're also quite powerful militarily. So, okay, so to start with, one of the first areas to look is up at the top left. You get a number of little alerts, and these will appear throughout the game to let you know about things that you should be aware of. So the first one here, too few rivals. This is a concept that EU4 has, in which you announce certain countries to be your rivals, and it effectively makes you more powerful. To use this power projections, you appear more powerful to other nations and gives you certain advantages, and it will also allow you to gain certain benefits if you can defeat them. Just go into here. Right, this is a diplomacy screen. It's one of a number of tabs you can get to by clicking on the country's shield. The Shield of Castile. So diplomacy we can also get to by right clicking on our own country or on other countries. Other countries gives us information on them and certain things we can do, but on our own country it tells us a few details. But this is the bit with the rivals here. So there are three nations that hate us: England, Burgundy and France. So interestingly, you can have a much easier game as Castile if you're able to ally France at the start, and I'm fairly sure when I started playing this game I was able to do that fairly easily, whereas now it seems quite common for France to hate you at the start of the game. So no longer an option. So we click on any of these blank shields to choose our rivals. I am not particularly keen to rival France or England. Both of them are very powerful, France especially. England starts off in a very bad position but becomes powerful later. So let's rival the other two that definitely hate us, so that is Burgundy. So we get an opinion of us. Red is bad, green is good, yellow is neutral. We get an estimate of how powerful their army is compared to ours and how powerful their navy is compared to ours. So you can sort of see why I'm not keen to rival England and France. Admittedly, France doesn't look much more powerful, but they soon will be. So We'll see anyway, but for now I'm going to go with Burgundy because they're definitely weaker. Another shield, take Morocco, who are a good one because we will probably end up fighting them as well. At least if we're lucky and things go well enough. And right, well, of the two, I would rather rival England, even though their navy is much more powerful, so they appear more powerful at the start. In 1444, England are about to have a really, really bad time. So, in fact, in some ways, England and France are going to have a bad time. Interestingly, we haven't started with Aragon hating us, which is unusual. So what I would normally say, as far as Aragon is concerned, would be that you can rival them, but try not to fight them, because one of the advantages Castile has is there is an event later in the game. We will see events, they pop up right in the middle of the screen, and usually they're random, but sometimes they're fixed and based on history. And one we do get as Castile is the Iberian wedding, which is a historical wedding that happened between Castile and Iberia, and it allows them to bring both countries under our control. In much the same way that you can do with personal unions, potentially, except that it's almost certain to happen. So generally there's no point fighting Aragon. However, on this occasion it would appear that we can actually ally them, which I'm not sure has ever happened to me in a game with Castile before. So normally you would be forced to rival them and you'd be looking for allies elsewhere. So yeah, that was the diplomacy screen again, just for Aragon. So you just right click on Aragon and you have a number of things that you can do, and one of them is offer alliance. So that's something we have done. Another important option is royal marriage. Generally speaking, it's a good idea as a Christian nation to make royal marriages even with people you're not going to ally. We probably will ally Portugal. We're historical friends with Portugal. Admittedly, they're likely to drag us into wars with Morocco, but we do tend to be friends with them. Let's just leave that there for now, except to note that Naples over here is also a vassal of Aragon. So all of this sort of, I don't know, browny reddish land is Aragon. That red land there is England. So hopefully with the Iberian wedding, unless we're very unlucky, we will not only end up with all of this land, we will also end up with Naples, the purple land, as a vassal, which is a big plus for Spain. Anyway, so you see the alert for 2 free rivals has vanished. We've got another one for, we've got a free advisor slot. So okay, so this brings us on to monarch points. Monarch points are really important in this game. They're absolutely vital to it. They're kept track of up here, so we start with 56, 56 and 70. There's 3 types: administrative, possibly the most important; diplomatic, probably the least important, still very useful though; and military, which are important in the sense that it is vital to keep your technology level up with your rivals, which we'll look at in a bit. However, every month we gain 3 of each type of point, plus whatever our king or monarch of any kind brings us. So in this case, King 1 is bringing us 1 administrative point, 1 diplomatic point and 2 military points every month. So we get this every month and get it added to our score. He's actually not a very good king. The skills go from 0 to 6. So sometimes you can rate the king from 0 to 18 with the total skills, and he would rate as 4. He is, however, infinitely better than his heir, Enrique, who we really don't want as a ruler if we can avoid it, because he appears to be terrible. But you can also up this by picking advisors. Now, before hiring advisors, it's very important to just slide along to the economy screen, which is going to be vital to us in this game. So, don't need to understand all of these. We do have sliders that allow you to under-maintain certain things. Usually they're all full. Root out corruption, we currently don't have any, so it doesn't really matter where it is. So I'm going to put that at the bottom for now. But it also tells us what all our costs are and what our income is. We don't need to understand this in any kind of detail. The important bit is here. This is the amount of money we make or lose each month. So right now we're making 5.83 ducats a month. So ideally we always want to keep this positive. Very dangerous to have it negative. So when we're hiring advisors, if we look at our administrative advisor, they're ones for each category. And you can loosely split them into +1, +2 and +3 advisors. So with no DLCs, that's as high as they go. And they will basically add an additional +1, 2 or 3 monarch points in their respective categories. However, each of them also has a special ability, which is listed here just under their name. Some are better than others. However, if you remember, from a number of ducats we get, we can only afford +1 advisors, because a +2 advisor costs us 4 ducats a month. So even if we only have 1 +2 advisor and 2 +1s, we'll still be losing money. So +1's our only option. Now in this case we've been quite lucky, because Enrique here is his special ability is national tax modifier +10%, which basically gives us more money. Money is very important to a colonial nation because colonising is very expensive. We're not going to do any yet, but the more money we can build up beforehand, the better, and the more we can improve our income. However, money is not the most important thing, but we do keep track of money up here, but monarch points generally are more important than money. And the money, as I said, measured in ducats, so it's just assumed everyone the world over is using one currency. Okay, so we have 2 potential +1 advisors. So we've got one that helps us get on with people better and one that helps us build spy networks. We're going to go into both of those. There's advantages to either, but I personally prefer to improve relations with people. Generally speaking, I'm always going to be improving relations, whereas spy networks I only do when there's a reason. And the military advisor, okay, we've been very lucky here. This chap has morale of armies. That helps a lot in the early game with fighting battles. So it's a really good one to get at the start. There's also, I think, a +5% discipline, which is good all through the game. So those are generally the ones you want. There is in each category one that helps with money as well, which may also be useful for us. But you'll see we've now gone up to 5, 5 and 6 every month. Okay, and also the alert has vanished. So we've only got 2 more alerts here. These are ones we won't be able to get rid of. This one is warning us that we have a truce with Granada. So Granada is down here. It's the remaining Muslim nation that we want to get rid of. But we can't do anything about them until 1448. If you're planning to attack someone, it's always worth checking this truce alert. It's usually up there, especially if you have wars at all regularly, which we may not, to be fair, being primarily colonial. But it's worth checking just to make sure you don't have a truce, because if you attack someone and you've got a truce, there are serious penalties. So it's best avoided if possible, but we will be looking to attack them once we get into 1448. This last one is important for Christian nations, and it relates to the personal unions I mentioned earlier. So basically this is a list of all the Christian nations specifically, I think, who don't currently have an heir. There's quite a lot of them to start with. It lists the age of a current ruler straight after the name of the country. So if a ruler's young, it probably doesn't mean much. But certainly if a ruler's old, and potentially anyway, because, you know, we're just coming out of the Middle Ages here, people can die quite easily. If we can have a royal marriage with them, and then the ruler dies, there's a chance that someone from our dynasty will end up on the throne. And if that happens, there's a chance that we may end up taking over the country for nothing, if we're very lucky. It's fairly unlikely to happen. There are other things you can do. It's possible to actually put in a claim and fight a battle. Probably won't be doing that as Castile though, depending. But yeah, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on this whenever possible, because as a Christian nation it's definitely worth having royal marriages with people, even if you don't want to have an alliance with them. So, diplomacy. If we go back to our diplomacy screen, which is right click on our own country, there's actually an option here for number of diplomatic relations. We currently have 0 because the time is still stopped, and we're allowed up to 4 before we start getting penalties. The penalty is that for every relationship above 4, we start losing a diplomatic point per month. Although of course we're gaining 5 a month. So it's not that serious, but it will slow down our development. So again, best avoided. There's no real reason to do that as Castile. We don't need that many alliances as a rule. But we won't be able to get into diplomacy properly or any of this until we start the clock going, because there's a limit to how many alliances we can make at once. So I'll just leave that until we start the clock. So, what else do we have? Okay, so we've got 2 armies at the moment. We've got an army of 13,000 and an army of 11,000. Now, this is kind of lined up with 2 things. This is the military tab. You don't need to understand everything that's on here by any means. The important bits, as far as we're concerned, are the leaders. So we currently have 1 leader. This is actually a general, so they can be assigned to an army, and we're allowed up to 2. The other important bit is the number of land troops we've got versus the limit we're allowed to have. You have to keep an eye on that, because on the one hand, you're very likely to be attacked if you have too low an army limit, an army. Too few people in the army. So ideally you want to keep it up to the limit, have as powerful an army as you can muster. On the other hand, if you go even 1 unit above the current limit, you can get quite heavily penalised financially, which we really don't want. So it's something we have to be careful with. We've got exactly the same for the Navy here, except that if you go over the limit for the Navy, the penalty isn't as high, so we don't need to worry as much about that, but we'll try to avoid it anyway. The final thing that's quite useful is we have a couple of forts. You can't easily see the one in Toledo. There it is. Toledo's slightly special because it's currently our capital city, capital province. So to some extent it's always active, but our forts, if we look at the economy screen, are currently costing us 2 ducats a month to maintain, which is quite a lot considering, you know, we're only making 3.57 a month now. And there is an option, we can do it all together or we can do it individually, but for now all together, to mothball the forts. Means the garrisons leave, we stop really maintaining them. It's quite dangerous, as any danger of being attacked, or in the case of Castile, more likely an uprising, which could happen right in the spot where the fort is, because they will very easily take over the fort because no one's defending it, and then they will unmothball it, and we will have a hell of a time getting it back. But it has reduced the costs by half. So definitely worth mothballing them if we don't think there's about to be an uprising or a war of any kind. So the generals, we should generally have, no pun intended, a general on each of our armies. So what basically happens is, we click an army here. Yeah, this is our biggest army. We've got an option here, which currently says no leader. Click on the no leader option, we get a choice of generals. So we're just going to choose a general. Worth noting that they have some relatively detailed abilities represented by these little pips. That's a blank, that means no pips. You don't need to understand these in any detail. Generally, the more you have, the better, and there's a slightly less involved way of telling how good a general is by the number of stars. So an army with no stars has no general at all. Generally, an army with a general is always going to beat one without a general. If there's a massive difference in numbers or technology, then not the case, but having a general makes a big difference. A 1-star general isn't very good, they go from 1 to 3 stars, but to start with, we're only going to get 1-star generals most of the time. Okay, so we're probably going to want a second general. So, slightly unusual. Normally I would use this option here, which costs us 50 military points in order to recruit a general. However, on this occasion, There are a couple of other options here. We can either put the ruler in charge of an army, or we can put the heir in charge of an army. Now, because our heir is so terrible, if you remember 000, I'm actually going to put the heir in charge of the army. It doesn't cost us anything to do, and it's actually not terrible. He's not quite as good as the other general, but he's not bad. So we'll assign him to this army, so they each have a general now. It does increase the chances of the heir dying, but that may actually be a blessing because he's such a terrible potential king. And our current king is pretty young. He's only 39, so we've got a fair chance that if the heir does die, then we will be able to get another one and get them to adulthood. Okay, so I'm going to move this army over to the other fort, so that if there was an uprising, the fort's still being protected and maybe we can unmothball it. The other thing we should do is try to get our armies up to the force limit. So I'm not going to go into the reasons why, but every army at the moment should have 4 cavalry and the rest infantry. We don't currently have any artillery as an option. So each of our armies has 3 cavalry and the rest are infantry. So if we check our military screen, we can have an additional 7 units. So next to the big shield that has most of our menus on, there's this little production interface which gives you access to building things like army units and other things. So I'm going to build 1 knight, 1 more cavalry unit, so that'll take us up to 4 in each army, which leaves us 5 remaining units, which are all going to be infantry. So I'm just going to build them in the areas around. You should always build each unit in a different area if you can, because if you build more than 1 unit in a single area, they're done one after the other. So it will take much longer, basically. Okay, so that should get us up to the limit on the land force. We're 2 below the limit on the navy. So I'm going to build 2 more ships. I'm going to build them down here because this is where I'm going to keep the navy. So I'm going to build a heavy ship, and I'm going to build a transport ship, which is a cog. To explain that, I'm going to go and look at the navy. So we've actually got 2 navies. The first navy is made up entirely of light ships. Okay, they change name depending on the technology. Light ships really aren't intended for military use. They are able to fight, but generally they're sent on missions. Without any DLC, the only mission is protect trade, but it's very important for us as a trading nation. So what happens when you choose protect trade? You get a list of the trade nodes you can protect, which we are going to go into later. And when you hover over the send button, when you're deciding which one to send, you get an estimate of how much profit you'll make overall. The reason there's a danger of making a loss is because of the maintenance necessary to keep the ships running. So generally, even a small gain is a good thing. It's better than just keeping the ships lying idle. So our best options here are Safi and Bordeaux. They're both given the same. I'm going to go for Safi for reasons which may become more obvious later when we go into trade. The one other thing to bear in mind with trade ships is it's usually best to select this icon here as well. This basically tells them that if we ever get into a war, they should make a beeline for the nearest friendly port, which hopefully we'll have all over the world eventually, as Castile. And it will basically keep them from getting into a naval battle, because any full navy will probably wreck our trade fleet, and then we'll have to rebuild them. So this allows them to make landfall where they can't be harmed, and yeah, keep them safe. So our other navy, the proper military one, this has got 3 heavy ships and 10 transport ships. So the proper military ships are divided into heavy ships and galleys. These are both military. The difference is that heavy ships are much more expensive, much bigger, and more powerful, and they're intended to be out on the open sea. Galleys are not as powerful, but they gain an advantage disproportionate to their normal power and their expense, because they're very cheap to build, when they're on inland seas, which includes the entire Mediterranean. However, because as Castile we're going to be looking worldwide, I would argue that we should always be going for heavy ships. And to be fair, the game is pushing us that way. You'll notice we have no galleys to start with. So they're clearly thinking that way. Also, because if at all possible I want to avoid conflicts with England or France, and indeed anyone in the north for the time being, and all our conflicts are likely to be with Grenada and possibly Morocco and the North African Muslim nations, I want to bring our military navy down here. I'm going to put it in Sevilla because that's our main trade port, which is something we will get into. Okay, so we're now online to reach our limit in both Navy and Land Force Army. So okay, I just mentioned about the game nudging us a certain way, so it's worth having a look at the missions, which is this little flag icon. So EU4 is a slightly unusual game in the sense that there's no win condition. We start in 1444 and we're basically going to carry on playing until 1821. So you pretty much cannot lose or win. We're just carrying on. It's almost like an open world strategy game. So a lot of the time you make your own conditions for winning. Like a lot of people, which is something I'm probably going to do here, see how much land they can take, how big they can make the nation. It's what's usually called playing wide, but it isn't the only way to play it. And one way you could play it is to try and fulfill all these missions. It's worth doing anyway because you get rewards for doing it, which give you an advantage in the game. These loosely follow what Castile and later Spain did in history, although some are a bit generic as well. So certainly as a beginning player I'd recommend trying to follow these. It's a good guideline as to how to play the game, and I suppose you could consider yourself to have won if you fulfill all the missions, although that is quite difficult to do in the time you've got. So if we look at these, the first one on the left is Discover Caribbean. We can't actually do this yet, we need some technology before we can start doing exploration. Portugal is the only nation that can actually explore from the beginning. So as a colonial nation they're going to have a head start on us. However, they're not as big or as powerful or as rich, so they also have a big disadvantage. Additionally, Castile is one of the few nations that can actually have 4 colonists. We don't have any colonists yet, and we will get into that, but it does give us an advantage overall, but Portugal does get a head start. Okay, build to force limit. We're actually going to fulfill this one without any real issues, so that should give us a plus. Trustworthy allies, yeah, that's just something we'll build up over time. I wouldn't worry about it. High income, that will happen automatically. And repair Reconquista, which is something we should be building towards, and in fact we are at the moment, because again it's about reaching the force limit. It also mentions manpower. Manpower is right next to money. Similar concept, it's the people we have in reserve in this case to rebuild our armies, or to build our armies. So all those purchases of units that I made, each one would have cost 1,000 manpower. So it's going to take a while for that to build back up to 60%, but it is just a matter of time before we fulfill both of these missions. Okay, so yeah, we will keep going back to this screen and try and fulfill it as time goes on. Okay, so other things that we need to consider. I did mention colonists, so I'll just come up here. There are 4 types of people that we have in our employ. We have 2 traders, but they're both in use at the moment. The game has already assigned them, so we're not going to worry about them just yet. We don't have any colonists yet. We need more technology before we get any. We have 3 diplomats. We've used 2 of them because we've requested an alliance with Aragon and a royal marriage with Portugal, but we'll try to use them all the time. There's nothing really to be gained by having them sat idle unless you think you're going to need one in a hurry. We've also got 2 missionaries, and both are currently available because every province in our nation is Catholic, which is the state religion, so we have no reason to send missionaries out. In effect, the missionaries are sent to convert a province to Catholic, so we'll probably start using them once we start taking provinces from Muslim nations. Okay, so back to the shield. We have an estates button right on the far right. This represents 3 different power groups within the nation. Pretty much every nation has these. They're basically the traders, artisans, merchants are the burghers. The clergy are basically the church, the priests. The nobility are, well, the nobles. They're each tied to a type of monarch point, and every 20 years you can get what effectively counts as free monarch points from them. There are some additional things you can get from them, but every 20 years we should always come back and get these free monarch points. So their loyalty, very important. We should always have this at 40% or more if possible. Influence. Influence you do need to watch, especially the nobility in Castile. I believe it's a real disaster, probably literally, if you allow anyone's influence to reach 100%. Now, it won't happen as a result of the standard getting free monarch points that we're going to do every 20 years. That should be fine. They're never going to reach 100%, but we do need to watch so we don't do any extra things with a nobility that might give them too much influence. But if we keep it simple, it should be fine. Control, we don't need to worry about at all. So these standard things. Interactions. So for the burghers, we basically grant them monopoly charters, which loses us 5 prestige. Prestige is here, it's very important, but it's worth it because it allows us to get monarch points. So prestige goes from -100 to +100, and as long as it's positive we get benefits. The more positive, the more benefits. The higher we can keep it, the better, and it will tend to go down all the time. So it's going to be a struggle. Okay, so grant monopoly charters. Increases the loyalty. It's a 2-part set, this, and then we demand diplomatic support, which will give us 50 diplomatic power, but that will decrease their loyalty by 20. However, they're still above 40, so it's fine. The other section we can use with these guys is ask for contribution, but we need to wait until their loyalty is at 50%, and we don't want it to be too near the point where we're going to do the little free monarch point thing, but this will give us some free money. Okay, clergy. Same concept, seek support of the clergy. Demand administrative support this time, which gives us admin. Military. Call a diet, which is basically like a parliament but just nobles. So we basically sit around and listen to them whinge. And demand military support. And that gives us some military power. The clergy, because they've got quite high influence in Castile, we're a very religious nation, we also have an option to send an emissary to the Pope, which will give us 10 papal influence, which is also a good thing. We will later also be able to ask them to do world missions, which will help with our colonising. Okay, I think that's most of the things we can do before we press the clock. The one other thing I want to look at just down here is papal influence, the papacy. So we've gained 10 papal influence from sending an emissary to the Pope. If we click on the papacy, okay, there are 2 things we can use influence for. One of them is over here. We can spend 5 of our 10 papal influence in order to gain a chance at becoming the next papal controller, also known as the Curia controller, which gives you all these benefits listed here. So at present the papal state is a controller, and it's worth having, but there tends to be a lot of competition. And the price in influence doubles every time you invest in it. I do think it's always worth investing once, but as Castile, I'm not sure it's worth it to invest more than once. So if we just do once, we'll spend 5. It's down to 5 papal influence. And we currently have a 100% chance. So if the Pope dies tomorrow, we become the Curia controller and gain all these advantages, which would be great. But it may not happen. The other thing we can use papal influence for, if we get to 50, we can get these favours, I believe they're called, papal favours from the Pope. One of them, this one, it actually costs 100, but the rest cost 50. They're all very useful and we will be relying on them heavily later. So yeah, so generally we put 5 in every time there's a new Pope. It would now cost 10 to get any greater chance. Not that we can have a greater chance right now, but as the other nations pitch in, our chance will go down as they all put their pennyworth in. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily worth putting another 10 in, but when the next Pope comes, we'll put another 5 in for a chance towards the new one. So yeah, I think that's it. So we'll actually start the clock next game. And yeah, I'll see you then.